We're proud to welcome you to the Exceptional Advisor podcast series brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. This series aims to help you to better serve your clients, differentiate yourself from the competition, and enhance your ability to communicate those differences. Hi, I'm your host, Bob Powell.
So my guest today is Professor Valerie Tiberius. She is the author of a newly published book called What Do You Want Out of Life? A Philosophical Guide to Figuring Out What Matters. Valerie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get started, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, do you mind giving us a brief overview?
Sure. Well, I've been teaching ethics mostly at Minnesota for a few decades. And my work is mainly, broadly speaking, in ethics, which is a big area of philosophy. But most of the work, more specifically, that I do is on the topic of well-being and what it is to live a good life, and on the relationship between what psychologists do in their research on those topics and what philosophers have been talking about for thousands of years. So I am also working in the field that's called moral psychology.
Great. And we're going to talk about your book in particular. Where best to begin? Is it around this discussion of what it is we want and what stands in our way?
Yeah, maybe so. So I think if if someone asked you what you want out of life, you probably would have an answer. And so one of the things I try to do in the book is to convince people that you think you know what you want, but you don't really. So I think broadly speaking, most of us do know what our most important goals in life are, and for most of us, we have a lot in common. Most of us value our families, our friendships. We value our work, doing something, making a contribution, people value their religious communities or their religions or their hobbies. So we kind of know what we value. We kind of know what our important goals are, but we often don't really know exactly how they play out in our lives. So just what does it mean to fulfill the value of family? Like, we're all willing to say, yes, family's important, but what does that mean? And how does it prioritize? What's the relative importance of family as opposed to the other things that you value? So if you think about like the work-life balance crisis, which is, a ubiquitous topic of self-help books, everybody values work, everybody values life, by which they often mean family and friendship. But how do those things, when they conflict with each other because we have limited time, how do you work through those conflicts? So that's kind of where the book starts.
Yeah. You make a distinction between goals and values. Do you want to describe the difference?
Yeah. So I basically think values are a special type of goal. The category of goals is huge. It, for me, includes everything from, I would like to floss my teeth every day, to I would like to write another book, make sure my parents are well taken care of into their dotage. All of those things are goals. Keep the refrigerator stocked. But values are goals that are the most important goals to us. And values that are the good values for us to have are values that fit who we are as a person. So the best values for a person are those really important goals that kind of match or mesh with your personality, essentially, with what your emotional dispositions are like, which things bring you joy, which things are you're naturally drawn to. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess you talk about strategies to improve one's values and goals, and especially, I guess, if they maybe haven't thought about it in the way that you have, which is these are the things that are important to me, and these are the things I spend my time on, or I spend my money on, or whatever the case may be. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you're lucky, or maybe if you've done a bit of work on it, the way that you spend your time will match the things that are deeply important to you. But I think for some people, the time is spent on things that don't actually matter that much, but that seem urgent at the time, or that you've sort of been enculturated to think this is what really matters. And so you spend a lot of time doing it, but it doesn't bring you any joy, or it, doesn't fit well with all the other things you want to do in your life. It creates a lot of stress and conflict. So yeah, I think if you're a very fortunate person whose life's gone really well already, the things you spend the most time on probably are the things you value most. But I think for a lot of people, it requires a little reflection and rethinking to ask, well, am I actually spending my time, or for that matter, my money? I mean, that's probably the interest of financial advisors. Am I really spending those resources on the things I care about, or have I been led astray at some point?
Yeah. So you talk about these strategies for identifying, improving your values and goals: introspection, lab rat strategy, guided reflection, learning from others, and exploration. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah, I guess, why don't I give you kind of an overview of the sort of central theme there. I think people think that, well, I know from talking to people, and in fact, I tended to think this way myself. If you want to learn something about yourself, just sit down and think, introspect. Just ask yourself, what am I like? What do I like? What is my personality? But it turns out that people have all sorts of blind spots and biases and self-narratives that can be very flattering and nice to believe, but not actually very close to the truth. So the first strategy I talk about is introspection, because I don't think it's useless. But the rest of the strategies all have to do with trying to get yourself out of that rationalizing part of your brain that tells these nice stories and that thinks it knows everything, and to get yourself a little bit more in touch with the unconscious, or, not fully present to conscious, those sort of subterranean feelings and tendencies that we have. So the lab rat strategy, for example, is to, look at yourself as if you were an animal in a lab, and then think, well, how is this creature doing? How is it behaving? How is it responding to its environment? We can do that sometimes with help from, an advisor or a coach, or sometimes even a friend who can give us that perspective on ourselves. But I think we can also try to take that perspective on ourselves. It's hard, but I think we can do it.
Yeah. What about the other strategies? Was it guided reflection is one of them? And
right. So again, there are certain guided reflection strategies that clinical psychologists and coaches use to get you to think about the things you really want, without just listening to the part of yourself that's in charge. So some of those strategies have to do with just trying to get yourself into a kind of a relaxed state and free your mind. Things like meditation and mindfulness training can help with that, where the goal is to sort of prepare yourself to listen to what you're like emotionally, as opposed to listening to that the rationalizer, the great rationalizer in charge. I also think, so the last strategy I talk about is exploration, because at one point I thought, well, it's not just that you're looking at yourself and asking, what am I like? What do I like? What do I care about? Isn't really sufficient if there could be things out there in the world that you haven't really experienced. So it might be that, so think about people who have been on a career path because it was the career that was always expected of them. They find themselves in midlife, having a midlife crisis, thinking, good God, not 10 more years of this, can't do it. In order to know what else you could do that would make you happy, you have to do some exploration. It's not just about thinking about yourself. You also need to look and see what else is out there. And one of the ways to do that is to have friendships, other people who can model other ways of living from the one that you're used to. Also, reading and reading, especially reading like biographies and reading about people who lived lives in a different way can kind of open your mind to different possibilities.
Yeah. It's interesting. I write a lot about retirement, and in talking to retirees who are leaving their primary career, they often say, or maybe they've been laid off from their primary career, and they say, thank goodness, now I can go do the thing that I've always wanted to go do.
Really?
Yeah, because I think they've thought about what they would do if they, could leave the job that paid their salary. But
that's so interesting.
But now that they have the freedom to go do the thing that they want to do, they will.
Yeah, I know from talking to the therapists, because I've done some interviews with clinical psychologists, that those people are fortunate, because there are also people who retire and then are just so lost. You haven't. Maybe they don't talk to financial planners.
No, we get those people too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Actually, before we talk about resolving the conflicts that arise, I'm curious, as you know, our audience are largely financial advisors, working directly with clients. Talk a little bit about how these advisors can sort of figure out what matters most to them. Is it any different for them than it is for ordinary folks?
I wouldn't think so. I think the kinds of things, it's one thing about the way philosophers approach these kinds of questions as opposed to the way therapists approach them. The tendency is to try to be very, very general. So I think the guidelines that I offer in the book, they're kind of intended to work for anybody. I think, they're probably less useful for the person who's got it figured out already, but that's not surprising. Right. I don't think there would be a specific, well, you might know better than I, because I don't know what the life of a financial planner is like.
Well, I think they value being good at their job. They value having clients who respect them. They, value having the admiration or respect of their peers.
So I think that's already a kind of reflective, what's the word? Like, you've already made some progress in life if you understand that what you value about your job is having some skills that you are good at, that you enjoy using, helping your clients, making a contribution to other people's lives. I think maybe it's because I talk to a lot of young people, because I teach college students. But there are a lot of people who aren't really so sure what matters to them about their jobs. So actually, maybe you're just a very reflective financial advisor, and you have figured that out. That's exactly the kind of thing that I think people need to do, is to think, yes, I value my job, I value work, but what is it you value about it? Is it the money? Is it the autonomy you get? So maybe you don't have to go to the office anymore. Is it or is it using the skills, developing skills, learning new things, helping people. I'm not here to say that some of those answers are right and some are wrong. Those are just different ways of being, but they certainly will mean different things for how you think about your career and how you think about it compared to the other things you care about.
Yeah. So one other question tied to that is the financial advisor's role oftentimes is helping their clients align their money with their values.
Right.
And what can they do to help facilitate that so that their money and values perhaps are more aligned than not?
Is the main job of a financial planner to do with investing for retirement, or are you advising people on spending
It's
money
a broad
in
range
general?
of things. It could be saving for retirement. It could be saving for a kid's college education. It could be, any and all things having to do with wealth and investments, right? Any goal that a client has is, presumed to be something that the FA could help that client achieve with their money.
Yeah. And do you find do clients generally come with a set of important goals that because if I were about to be forced to be a financial advisor, I would very quickly want to adopt a kind of values exercise where I sat down with my clients and said, well, let's think about what are the things that are important to you. And I don't know if that's something that financial advisors already do.
Some do and some don't. I think some are better skilled at it than others.
Yeah.
Sometimes clients will walk in and say, my goal is retirement, but that's a very, what does that mean? It means different things to different people. For some, it could be traveling the world year round. For others, it could be staying at home and watching the grandkids and gardening.
Right. And to me, to my mind, that would be the most important thing that a financial planner could do to start out. Is financial advisor, not planner, or are they the same thing maybe? That would be the most important first step, is to try to identify, well, what are the main things that you care about? And, as I said before, I think some people are more clear on that than others. I guess I would, as a moral philosopher, I suppose I'd be inclined to think that in line with that strategy of exploration, that a financial planner might actually, this is something I would want from my financial planner, might actually suggest things that you might not have thought of as the client. So, for instance, people might, maybe people do automatically think of charitable giving, but not everyone does. If I think about my friends, they're not all in that mindset. Most of them are thinking about leaving everything to their children. But I would think that a lot of people are sustained by their moral values and by their thought that they are contributing to some good in the world. And so having it suggested to you that one of the things you can do with the success that you've had while you were alive is to think about how you could channel some proportion of that into some moral values that you've been committed to. I'm not sure if that's something that you...
Yeah, I think it is. I think, there's for many clients, there are two issues. There's the financial legacy, but there's also this other legacy that sort of, it's like, who am I and what did I stand for and how will I be remembered?
Right.
And I think that's important, that, and how will my children remember me, or my, again, right? What is it that I'm leaving behind other than my money?
But isn't it, if you want to have a legacy, isn't it typically money that you're...
Well, that's certainly, yeah, I think there are two legacies. There's the money legacy, right? There's, at the extreme, there's the money, that's associated with someone's name on a hospital wing.
Right.
or a university building.
Yep.
And then there's other legacies that are sometimes referred to as ethical wills, right, where people are saying it's something beyond money that I'm leaving behind, a memory of what my values were.
Oh, that's really interesting. I haven't actually heard of an ethical will.
Yeah, it's not well known, but it's becoming increasingly popular among the financial advisors.
Huh.
So,
Can I ask, what does it amount to? Is it actually, I mean, what does it consist in? Is it actually a statement?
well, it typically consists of a person who is describing what they valued and what they hope their children will value because of that, or help the children or heirs understand better the decisions that were made and why, because these values were important to someone at some point in their life.
That's really nice. Yeah, I like that a lot. And it does, not everyone has or will have a ton of money by the time they pass on, to leave to some, to make a kind of meaningful contribution to some ethical project that they thought was important in their lifetime. But anybody could have an ethical will, as you were describing. It's the kind of thing that, could sort of help to solidify and sustain a set of values throughout generations. That's really nice.
Yeah. So, let's move on to conflicts. You spend a lot of time talking about responses to the conflicts that arise when you might have multiple values that you're trying to achieve, and maybe we could talk a little bit about the responses to those conflicts, or talk about how the conflicts arise in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think conflicts are just so common and everywhere that, and I think they come because we don't have infinite anything. We don't have infinite time or money or energy or waking hours. So there's some strategies for dealing with conflict that are kind of simple and easy, and most people already know those strategies. One is, if you have two conflicting goals, well, give one of them up. If you both want to stick to your diet and to have cheesecake, one of those things has to give way. But that solution isn't very helpful for values, because typically our values they're these big general abstract things that are incredibly important to us, and you can't give them up. You can't, well, which would you like to give up, your family or your job? It's not the right solution.
Right. It's not up. Yeah.
The other kind of strategy that's sort of simple, and most people, simple on the face of it, is to change the means that you take to the end that you have, or to change the priority that you're giving to it. And, that is, I think, helpful, and people do that naturally. The matter of the relative priority of your goals. So if you think about, as you develop as a person, and most people have children. So you get married, you have children, your children go to college, and then you get an empty nest, and then gradually the nest is empty and your own parents become needy. So that sort of trajectory is going to force you to give shifting priorities to family and work. When your kids are little, it's hard not to prioritize raising children. And when your kids leave the house, it makes a lot of sense to prioritize work. When you're young and maybe you don't have children yet, or maybe you're not going to have them at all, and you're sort of trying to really learn a bunch of skills and get somewhere, it can make sense to prioritize work. So I think one thing we do in life naturally, but we could be more mindful about it, is change the relative priority of these goals. And when I say we could be more mindful about it, I think the issue is that sometimes you think, well, this is how I prioritized it, so that means work is more important because that's what I've done. And it isn't the case that, just because work is more important for this 5-year period doesn't mean that work always has to take precedent over everything. So I think we need to be open to making these shifts throughout our life as our circumstances change. But then, so the strategy that's most important to me, because I think it's not one that is familiar and that people talk a lot about, is the strategy that I call reinterpretation. And that's the strategy of thinking differently about what it means to succeed in terms of the value that you have. So, for instance, if you take a career path, early in your career path, you might have a very specific set of standards about what it means to be good. For instance, what does it mean to be a good financial advisor? Or what does it mean to be a good accountant or a good professor or doctor or whatever? And you might think, well, means I have to get promoted by the time I'm 30. I have to be making X dollars a year by the time I'm 35. People have those sort of markers for success. But then when you get older, and you don't have to be very old to have this happen, things change. And maybe you didn't get promoted and you didn't ever make X dollars a year. And you have to find some way, because you aren't going to give up work. You're not going to say, I don't care about my work anymore. I think it behooves us to think of some new, more suitable way to think about what success is, and whether that's in career or family or friendships or exercise or whatever. So that's the strategy I'm most kind of committed to, because I think it's not the standard thing that people think about.
Yeah. So we often talk about financial advisors being at times part-time psychologists, and I think this is an interesting case where if an advisor is trying to help a client deal with the conflicts that they face with respect to their values and the trade-offs that they might face, and maybe confronting the clients who may not have achieved what they set out to achieve, is there a role for the advisor to play in helping them sort of deal with these conflicts and respond to them?
That's a good question. You know, you said earlier when I asked you if this kind of clarification of your values was something financial advisors did, you said, well, some people are better at it than others. And I think, like, you know, it's the kind of thing, helping someone to understand that they could interpret success or fulfillment in a different way that would be more suitable to them, more fitting. I think that's something, you know, friends can do for each other, spouses can do for each other, coaches, and why not financial advisors? But I guess my resistance to just saying yes is that it's hard to do it well. And so, you know, that doesn't mean you shouldn't, but you do have to be a person who has a little bit of emotional intelligence. And but you know, as you said, sorry, this is not true of philosophers, but financial advisors are sometimes, you're kind of put in the role of being a psychologist.
Right.
And so,
and there is an emerging field of financial therapists that are out there helping people deal with money issues. Yeah. So there is an emerging body of knowledge that's being out there, and a new certification that deals with at least helping people become better at that, maybe emotional side.
Do they tend to have clinical training, or do they tend to have financial planning training, or both?
They first come at it from a financial planning point of view and then get the additional training to provide therapy.
I think that's really cool. And I also think, you know, if you are a financial planner who, going back to what advice do I have for them? If you are a financial planner who has some of those skills, you might get more out of your job by doing that kind of training. It might be a kind of a way for you to think about success in your own job. I wonder, do you think just in your life that women more often have those kinds of skills than men, or?
No, that's okay. I'd say knee-jerk yes, I think. And some of the research has suggested that women tend to prefer dealing with female financial advisors, and I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why.
Interesting. And do women tend to go to seek financial advice as much as men do?
Not nearly as much. I think there's some barriers in terms of their, in some cases, their perceived lack of knowledge and things of that sort. And we can talk more about this, but the industry is male dominated in terms of the number of financial advisors who are male relative to those that are female, relative to those that are people of color and minorities.
Right. So it's the same kind of thing. Like, if you look any married couple I know, a male female married couple, it's always the man who takes the car to the garage, and it's partly because mechanics tend to be male and they tend to not respect female clients and maybe overcharge them. And so it's that same kind of pattern, and it just happens everywhere.
I think the pattern exists to a degree, yeah. And I'd be curious, like as you think about financial advisors who are trying to maybe uncover the values of their clients and help them resolve whatever conflicts there might be. Is there a gender difference from your perspective? Do financial advisors need to think differently about how they approach the values of a...
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one thing that I've thought a lot about and that I do write about in the book is that sometimes the conflicts, I mean, I know about this from the point of view of a woman in a field that's pretty male. Sometimes the conflicts that you have are not between your values, but with the world. So you want to do something and the world doesn't want you to do it. And, some kinds of conflicts are just physical obstacles, like, hey, I'd like to fly. But, the world has informed me that this is not going to be possible. But I would also like to be, I've done pretty well for myself, but when I was younger and confronting some of the sexism in my field, I had goals that were being inhibited by the way our society is organized.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it would be useful for financial advisors to be aware of that. I mean, it can't hurt to be aware of it if women are in careers where, I mean, there's so much information about women making less money than men for the same amount of work and not asking for things when they negotiate that men ask. Is that something that would be appropriate, do you think, for a financial advisor to talk about? Because if I had a financial advisor at certain points in my life when I had been negotiating, if I had somebody who had the knowledge and the wherewithal to tell me, you should ask for this because that's what all the men get in your field, or you should ask for this because the worst they could do is say no. That would have been super helpful. Is that the kind of thing?
I think that's fair game, right? And especially if someone is acting as a fiduciary, right, trying to act in the best interests of their client,
right?
Having their client earn as much as possible would be in everyone's best interest.
That's the kind of thing that women are starting to do for each other, to encourage each other to be better at negotiating. But I would think a financial advisor could be really helpful there because they would be perceived as objective and not having any kind of, it's not, no ulterior motive.
Yeah, and they certainly have a broad view of salaries and income across the gender spectrum. So
right.
They would be in a very good position to know what someone's worth might be in the world.
Actually have some relevant knowledge, which friends rarely have.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you in the book, I guess you sometimes refer to this as the unfair culture. Is that what you refer to as these obstacles that the world is working against you?
Exactly.
So we've covered, I guess, maybe not, I probably haven't done the book justice, quite frankly, because it is chock full of great information, Valerie.
Well, we don't want to say too much about it because then people won't be motivated to buy it for themselves.
And we do want them to be motivated enough to buy the book and learn more. I do want to make mention of, and I'm not sure to the degree to which it was covered in the book or not, but you wrote an essay for the Wall Street Journal where you talked about strategies that can help us think more clearly about our values and goals. Is there anything in that essay that we didn't cover today? It looks like we might have, but I just want to make sure that...
Yeah, I don't think so, because I think that the Wall Street Journal, they did such a nice job. I was so impressed with them, the way that they excerpted bits from the book and put subtitles on it that were different from mine, but that really were, accurate. And so it is really the same things that I talk about in the book with new labels.
Yeah, and...
they're good at marketing.
They have a desire they value selling their newspaper. So we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that we missed or anything that bears reemphasizing from your perspective?
My brain is buzzing with all the things we talked about, and it's not thinking of something that's missing. It was a fun conversation.
I think, in your conclusion, you talk about the solution to the human problem is to figure out what really matters and find ways to live up to those values in your life. To me, that sort of sums up everything, right? That's like the goal of life.
Yes, I'm glad you think so.
Well, I personally, when people, when we were young, we always struggled with the question, right? You mentioned the Monty Python movie in your book, and we struggle with the meaning of life.
Yeah, I can never remember the quote from the Monty Python movie verbatim. It's something like, it's a whole wide-ranging movie with all sorts of hilarious.
Yeah, eat well, exercise, have friends.
Yes, read a good book.
Read a good book. Don't listen to others. I don't know. It was great advice.
Yes.
Was it
that's what's so...
The Life of Brian, or was it which?
It's Monty Python. I think it's called The Meaning of Life, actually.
And The Meaning of Life.
Yeah.
Well, I always answered that question a bit differently, which was the meaning of life is to have a life of meaning.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good. You can trademark that one. So
it's good. It's a little vague, but it's good. I guess, if there is one thing that that maybe we didn't talk about much, is there's a way in which the Wall Street Journal article is very focused on the individual and, what do you want? What do you care about? And it is an important theme in the book that isn't reflected there, which is that, there is something to our being human. We have a lot in common just in virtue of being human beings. And one of the things that we have in common is that we're deeply social. We care about each other. We get happiness from taking care of each other. And I think that's important to remember, because I think it's easy to get caught up with other kinds of goals that are more pressing and more, remunerative maybe, and that really demand our attention, like our jobs. But I think over the course of a lifetime, it's important to think about to acknowledge how social we are and how much it matters to us, how we are in relation to other people.
Yeah, your chapter, The Value of Others, is a powerful one, and it reminded me of a conversation and a lecture that I just went to. Rabbi Geller, who wrote a book called Getting Good at Getting Old, talks about the value, especially as one ages, the value of friendship, and how the lack of friendship can lead to isolation, depression, et cetera, et cetera. And so this notion of valuing others is an important one and a vital one.
Cool. I'm glad you found that chapter powerful. I think, isn't it what we learned from the pandemic that isolation is bad for people?
Except for curmudgeons like me.
There's always exceptions to every rule.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today. I'm certain that everyone who listens to this podcast will deeply benefit from it, from you sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And I hope that they go out and buy the book, What Do You Want Out of Life?
Thanks so much. This was really delightful.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Advisor podcast, brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or our website at www.investmentsandwealth.org/podcast to get the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast series. For additional resources, updates on events, and exclusive membership deals, visit www.investmentsandwealth.org.